just because someone is an expert in something, it does not mean they know how to create a learning experience.
Not at all. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen. Okay, one
It's
last
an
thing. We can
interesting
also
idea.
edit this out. An example from my Julie got one, so I get one. Well, what's the verb? Wave?
Waft. I said waft. I don't know if that's correct. But
Yeah, okay. We're just gonna
Yeah.
say that. All right.
All right.
Party?
Party on.
Party time?
Party time.
Party
Question time.
Julie, do you want to go first?
Either way.
You go first.
Okay.
I did with Dennis, so.
Fine. Fine. I'll be happy to do that. Okay, great. Welcome to Beautiful Questions. We're so glad you're here with us. And Alma and I are really, really honored to have Kelly Ross as our guest today. Kelly, we met Kelly because Kelly is an alumna of the same graduate school as us, graduate school that a large percentage of our listeners have heard of before. Kelly, you've been extremely generous as an alumna who came before us, and you've I know for both me and Alma. So welcome, and we'd love for you to please start by telling us a little bit about your background and what brought you to study learning and organizational change to begin with.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Good to be with both of you. I really grew up professionally at McKinsey. I spent 9.5 years there and had the amazing opportunity to be part of 5 different McKinsey offices and live on 3 different continents and work in 20-something countries as part of my work. I had a lot of different roles in that period of time. And I had been living abroad for almost 7 years by the time I left McKinsey. And I was really just thinking about like what was next for me. And one of the questions that I wasn't sure the answer to was if I could get a job doing the kinds of work I had been doing in learning and change and knowledge somewhere else, because McKinsey afforded me this opportunity to learn and grow and build and do on the job. And I wasn't sure if I had enough like formal credential to be able to get a job like that somewhere else. So I started looking for, I was trying to figure out what exactly I wanted from a credential and what I was looking for. And then actually a friend of mine found the MSLOC program and called me up and said, like, I think I know what you're going to do next. I found this program. He was looking for different programs, and he was like, I think these are your people.
Kelly, where can I get a friend like that? That would be cool. A friend who just calls me up and says,
yeah. He's like, I know what you're going to do next. Anyway,
Alma, I've been looking for things. The phone call is gonna come. I'm gonna call you.
All right, I do have that friend. He's just a little delayed.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Yeah, we're all looking out for each other.
It's true.
He's a little bit when I was sort of like, "What are you talking about?" But then I looked at the program and I was like, "Damn, I think he's right. I think these might be my people." So that's what led me to MSLOC.
Okay, I have quite a few questions. Could we, like, if we go backwards a little bit? Yeah.
Okay.
So first, what did you actually study like in undergrad? Like, what was interesting to 18 to 21-year-old Kelly?
I have a business degree, a Bachelor of Science from Indiana University. And I studied, I concentrated in business management and international studies. And I have a minor in environmental science. So what I was like really interested in was environmental work, which I'm not doing at all today. And my dad in particular had a strong view that I should like get a degree that would help me get a job. Right. He also has a business degree, so he had some bias that was the way to go. But it worked out really well. I could get a major in business and a minor in environmental science, and I got to there was lots of overlap between those programs, and so yeah, that was interesting to me.
So then from there you went straight into McKinsey and
I went to KPMG for a year.
okay.
And I worked in their like planning events and learning programs and things. Mostly because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. It was a time in an interesting time, different than we have now, where there were lots of different jobs available. And so I was kind of like, I knew someone who'd worked in that department, and I was like, this kind of sounds interesting. And then I think a year later, about a year later, I started at McKinsey.
And
Well,
what were go
no,
ahead.
go ahead, Alma, please.
I'm just wondering about, okay, so you said you did a lot of things. You were in 3 countries. You lived in 3 countries. You worked in like 20.
Mm-hmm.
What were like, especially at the beginning, like what types of activities were you doing? Like what did a little bit
In
of
my McKinsey work?
yeah, in your McKinsey work?
Yeah.
Because I guess what I'm not understanding, I haven't listened to your whole story, and so obviously
Yeah.
like I'm trying to understand, you came kind of from this business thing, and then towards your end of like your tenure at McKinsey, you already know that you want to be like in learning and change, but did you have like explicit roles of that, or how did you find that thread?
Yeah. Well, first I would say that I spent a lot of years thinking that I was broken and there was something wrong with me because I don't have a career like this. I have what I would say to you today is I have had more of a wanderer path. I've done lots of different things, and I think now, looking back, even though I wouldn't have said this at the time, that each of those different experiences helped me figure out what I want to do and where I want to go. But I am also somebody who says I still wonder sometimes what I'm going to be when I grow up. And so I don't know what is like what I will do forever, right? Like I think there's lots of possibilities. So to answer your question, I started at McKinsey in their learning department, which is a global function. And so my early roles were about helping make the global learning programs happen. So most of what I worked on were like career inflection points. There are some key programs that everybody at a certain point in a level in their McKinsey life goes to, and those are the programs that I started working on. So I got to learn a ton about so many different skills, hard, and I don't really like the term soft skills, but like, what I mean by the difference between those, right? And in the beginning, those programs were all global. So every program brought together, so I traveled all over the world, and every program brought McKinsey people together from all over the world. As budgets got tightened, they became more regional programs, but in the beginning, they were really global programs. So there was both a ton of learning as a learning person. There was, other skills. I was operational kinds of organizational skills that I was using. And then there was a lot of learning like at the dinner table, which I found initially very intimidating, of like, I'm talking to all these different people and what do they know and how are they describing it? And
I like that phrase.
So many interesting things.
Learning at the dinner table.
Oh, we do it all the time. Or that. I mean, Alma, you and I just did that learning on a walk, right, by the lake.
Right.
So,
but I guess I haven't heard anyone
Julie, we've done that over coffee. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How would you? I'm trying to think about what point in my life did I hear about McKinsey, or about consulting firms. It wasn't, I'll tell you one thing, it was not in college. I was not aware of McKinsey in college. Maybe, and even more recently, and I've had conversations with people who say, what does McKinsey actually do, right? Like, what do these consulting firms actually do? And this is slightly off topic, but I also think highly relevant, because one of the things that I hope that we get to touch on in this conversation is a little bit of the difference between working for a major global consulting firm and then kind of going out on your own, doing both similar and different kinds of work. And I wonder if you could describe to the novice, to someone who really just doesn't really know much, what is McKinsey? And I mean, let's focus on McKinsey because that's the one but I'm sure this is true for many, for other firms that are similar.
I can only speak for McKinsey.
Good.
So I spent almost a decade there. McKinsey is a management consulting firm, and is organized, is a really complicated matrix with functional expertise areas, a marketing practice, an operations practice, a strategy practice, etc. And also, what's the right way to say it? Also thinking about serving different industries, and then they are geographically across lots of different countries. I think, I don't want to get my data wrong and tell you how many countries, but I want 84 comes to mind when I was there. I think it's higher now, but around the world, number of, so then there are geographical, part of the matrix is you belong to a geographical office in addition to where your work is in your functional or your industry. And then there are, where I started, a whole bunch of professionals that are not in one of those practices because they are firm service professionals. So the people that are internal support, I guess would be the best way to say it. And that's where the learning function is one of those groups. So as an organization, McKinsey's clients are organizations that are looking for one or more of those pieces of support.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just, pretending like I am, a middle
sixth
school
grader.
Sixth grader.
Yeah.
And I never heard the term management consulting, but I know a little bit about business, and I know that businesses and organizations are basically there to make money. How does McKinsey make a living? How do they make money? What service or product do they provide? And in turn,
so they sell projects that you, as the organization, you're looking for some support in one of those functions or industries. And so, for example, the organization practice is probably the closest to LOC, learning and organizational change work that we all do. And so an organization might hire McKinsey to help them answer a big, hairy question or solve a big problem. So it's something in that like talent space, something thinking about organizational health, et cetera, right? And same thing if you hired their marketing practice or their strategy practice or
right. So by the way, so that in itself to me is like a great, fascinating insight, right? That one organization, like if I'm McDonald's and my job is to sell as many burgers and shakes or whatever as possible. And I've become very large over the years, and I'm publicly traded, and we make a lot of money.
You did,
right? And then, but now I have some sort of issue. Like I'm not sure if I should expand into Japan right now or wherever.
Right.
So I might pay a lot of money to some other people to give me an answer on that. Is that what you're telling me?
Yep.
Amazing. That's amazing.
Yep.
Okay. And I think like I really, I think you'd be surprised at how many people don't really know this. And I think and the amazing thing is that firms like McKinsey and others are very successful at this because clearly they must help places like McDonald's make those big, hairy decisions, and right? And that requires the support, and that requires the support of many, many people, including people like yourself, that were making sure that the consultants of McKinsey were constantly engaging in learning. Right? Is that am I kind of getting that right?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Back to
consulting in a nutshell. Yes, consulting in a nutshell. Which is good. Because that's so going back to your story, and I think this is one of the main topics that, there's consulting in general, and then now the type of consulting that you do or that arguably that the three of us here do, right?
Yeah.
Or aspire to do. And you we're in McKinsey, you begin to be more and more attracted, is the word, to the learning and to the change, organizational change. And your friend calls you up and says, this is your next move. What happens from then? Like, what do you learn? How do you change your understanding of yourself?
Well, I think I'd been at McKinsey for, I don't know, 8 or 8.5 or 9 of those years. However long it took me to maybe the last year I knew about the MSLSE program and I was figuring out what I was going to do next. But I had a lot of different roles. First focused on the learning programs themselves, which attracted me to learn more, understand more about pedagogy and how we teach certain skills. And I had this really incredible opportunity to watch amazing internal and external people teach McKinsey people things. And so I was
wait. External people? So wait, sometimes McKinsey would pay
so
other
McKinsey
people?
uses a mixture of internal and external people to teach these programs.
Wow.
And today I'm one of the external people, but at the time I was an internal person who was helping to manage the operations of the program. But I had a ton of exposure to the content and how we're teaching it and watching different people. When you get to be an observer of a lot of different programs and a lot of different faculty, you really get to, there's a lot to learn of just like watching that all happen. I was also really interested and curious about like, how does the content get built? How do we think about how we're going to help? One of the programs I worked on for a lot of years was a program for business analysts. So they typically joined after undergrad and stayed for around 2 years was a typical path. And so partway through that, they came to this program where we were continuing to build their skills. And so I was really curious about the like, how do we decide what we teach them when, and how do we do that? And what does, it was before the days of hybrid and learning and all of that. So it was, like you flew someplace and we spent a week together and you learned a whole bunch of things. So I was really curious about the learning, I don't know, like the learning pedagogy or the learning science behind all those pieces. But then I got exposed to lots of different things to answer your question, Alma, then I was a program specialist, which is where you're the kind of the liaison between the people that are teaching the program and some of the experts, internal and external, that McKinsey brings together to like decide on the content. So that was a fascinating role. I also ran McKinsey's, I lived in Austria for 2 different assignments, and I ran McKinsey's learning center there from an operational perspective. So being in like really thinking about that from all the different programs that were happening in a physical space, and all the things that were needed from like important but probably not focused on learning kinds of things. Like when I first got there, we didn't have great vegetarian options because it was Austria and that's not really so common there, at least all those years ago, right? So I literally was in the kitchen with the chef and a cookbook and talking about like how we can have some vegetarian options and discussing things like, if you strain the chicken out of that does not make it vegetarian. So
are the pretzels? Do they do pretzels in Austria?
Yeah, and they're not vegetarian.
They're not?
No.
What do they put in?
I don't know if we want to. I don't know if we want to expose that on this podcast.
It's important to me because I try to keep.
Well, they are. You put pretzels in lye before you bake them, and that is not vegetarian. I'm sorry if I just like ruined pretzels for you.
You have really rained on his parade.
I'm really sorry. But from a like operational perspective, it was important. Like part of my job was to make sure that we would probably say like the user experience today, right? But like the people coming in, that we can feed and care for all of them. And so we had to find places where we could get kosher food for people who were strict kosher. We had to figure out how we could have just better vegetarian options. thankfully the chef and I became friends, and we were able to like work through that resistance, I would say.
Yeah. So
So I ran a learning center, and then I moved to Singapore, and my job was really different. My job there was really all about learning content. It was the job that I was so excited to get this job because my job then was, at the time, McKinsey had 16 offices across 11 countries. There were about 2,500 staff and consultants in the Asia region, growing really fast. And one of the things that McKinsey afforded me is this opportunity to like just try stuff and see what works. And so my job was to help there be learning beyond just those global programs that I had been part of. Those still existed. That team still existed. But in Asia at the time, there were 16 offices with 16 different approaches to learning. And so I, in our language, would say I helped create a community of practice of those learning people and help to create and get them to talk to each other and share resources, but also to build learning that can happen at the team level and at the project level and in the office geography level, and to do some things for the region as a whole. So it was a hard job and an amazing set of experiences. I used to get my mail in Singapore is how I think about it, because that's where I was based, but I traveled all the time. And I built content and I delivered content and I helped build the capability of internal McKinsey people to teach that content, and built that community of practice. Not that was not really the term that was used internally, but what you and I would call that, of learning profession, which was amazing.
That's awesome.
And it was in that job, Alma, where I got that phone call about, I think I know where you're going to go next, which was Northwestern's MSLSE program. And I wasn't sure if I could get a job doing the kind of stuff I was doing around learning, because I wasn't sure what credential would be needed, but I didn't know if I had it because I had a lot of on-the-job experience. And we know that LOC is not particularly well understood, and it also isn't, I think it's not really clear like what credential is needed. So different than some jobs where like you're sure somebody needs an MBA. I think that the market didn't really know what was needed, but I thought maybe I needed to go to grad school so that I could have some credential behind what the experience that I had.
Yeah. I'd venture to say the market still doesn't have a very clear idea.
I think that's true. Yeah.
But that's okay.
That's 100% true. And I think we need to talk about that and help move the market forward a little in some way. I want to just, and I think before we do that, I want to go back to a point you made, which I want to highlight because I think it's so important. So the role, your Austrian role, which sounded like it was, maybe included a larger operations focus, is so critical to learning. I think people sometimes don't understand this, but learning, of course, is about content, and of course, it's about community practice, but it's about everything else too, right? You can't have good learning without good coffee, or whatever your thing is.
All of it, which can be super frustrating because you're like, I don't know, I didn't have anything to do with your shower being not as hot as you wanted it to be, and yet you're surely going to put that on your evaluation,
right?
So.
Right. This stuff is
so then when you're the operational person, that then becomes your problem to solve, which was my job.
And I would say that it's actually it's really, I'm not saying that people, like, for example, I'm sure you don't deal with that much anymore, like in terms of, getting vegetarian food for people. However, it's great that you've had that experience, right? Because you understand what are the blocks that need to be put in place in order for a successful learning program to be, and you could be very, very attuned to that stuff. I think for me personally, even just some of the stuff I'm doing right now is it is not very glorious, but it's like literally making sure that there's good coffee in the morning.
It matters.
And it matters so much. But also my experience from being a teacher in a school where, where you understand that the environment that's created and, whether students are well fed and how many breaks they have and what time we start and light and all that stuff. It has such a large effect on learning, and it's great. I think that's just that's an important thing to highlight.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
yeah. Sorry, Alma, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just that whole thing you're describing is also referred to as user experience, right? And someone who is good. It sounds like, Kelly, you didn't use these words, but it sounds like you are quite good at thinking about experience design.
Yeah.
Right. And like,
we didn't call it that, but I think that's what we were doing. Yeah.
And it's the learning experience and all of the kind of adjacent experiences that will impact the user's ability to focus, whatever. So highly needed. Highly needed.
Highly needed.
Just because someone is an expert in something, it does not mean they know how to create a learning experience.
Not at all.
Amen. Amen. Can
a lot of my job in
for the people in the back?
I'll share something else with you if that's okay, and we could cut this if we need. But so part of this part of this Jewish holiday that we just celebrated here called Shavuot, it's celebrating the Torah, which is the Bible. It's celebrating the giving of the Torah. And some people have a tradition to stay up all night studying on this holiday. So I had to build a program for this synagogue that I work at that was going to be an all-night learning program, right? So you got to keep people engaged from, we started at midnight and went till 5 a.m. when we so midnight to 5 a.m. How are you going to keep people engaged? So of course I had to get really great teachers, right? And focus on content. So that, of course we're doing that. But
and
then
good coffee.
Absolutely.
Right? Good coffee.
Absolutely. And not only that, I was strategic about literally what time I was going to set the coffee machine to actually start brewing while we were in the middle of a certain class. So the coffee aroma wafts throughout the room.
Yes.
And then to have other, good coffee and tea. And then I had different courses. We had like at one point I brought out hot food, and then there was an ice cream party. And
a lot of my job in Asia was helping experts, people who knew something, like had just done some interesting project or written a book or whatever, helping them then turn that into something that was then a learning experience for, it depended what we were trying to do. But you are 100% right. Like, just because you know something about the topic does not mean you know how to educate other people on it or even share it with people in a way that's interesting.
Two very different skill sets.
Very different skill sets.
And then the experience, like to have the mindset, like, for example, that you just exemplified, Tuli, that you would even think about when the aroma of coffee should begin to, whiff throughout. What's the verb? Wave?
Waft. I said waft. I don't know if that's correct. But,
okay. We're just going to say that. Waft throughout the room and, like awaken their senses and stimulate their brains at in a very strategic, like, even that is a different skill set and way of thinking than the actual like content delivery, right?
Yes.
Or like
totally different.
So like there's layers upon layers of skill sets, and often we think, my mind right now is because I'm like reading lots of job descriptions, right? And so they don't always sometimes they break it down like you'll be doing this, but like, Kelly, if we took that job that you had in Austria, I wonder if they, if a recruiter or whatever wrote a job description for that right now, would they have enough insight to know that part of what made you really good at this job was obviously your interpersonal skills? You won over the chef. That was a highly strategic thing to do in such a situation. Oh, for sure. Right. And then, so they're like that type of like people skills, right? Interpersonal skills, whatever you want to call them. And then two, like user experience mindsets. You don't have to be, you don't need a certification in that, but like that you would even think to like, how does the coffee, the bed, the this, the that, all of those aspects affect learning.
And they're not always in your control. A lot of that wasn't within my
Right.
control, but doesn't mean we don't hear about it if it's not. And then I think also, in addition to like the coffee, like you're talking about, Julie, I think then you also have to think about like the way you construct the day or the half a day or like
Totally.
the week, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
So like where you take breaks and how long you take the break and how you think about helping people consider their energy is also super important to how we learn, because
Huge.
I was just having this conversation the other day with a client who I'm building this 1-day program for, and he was like, "That's too long for lunch." And I said, you're right. It's not how I don't need an hour to like eat the food,
Right.
but I think we I do think we need an hour break, because we're asking, these are senior executives. I'm asking them to be fully present and not using their devices in the several hours that will have happened before this and the hours that happen after. So they need a break for that. I also really want them, you can see the way I design the day, like where it's a build. And so I want them to be able to pause and reflect at that place.
Totally.
So we'll see if I win that battle or not. But that is an important piece of part of learning, right? Is not just the learning time, but all the things around it.
Totally.
Right. All the environmental cues, everything.
Mm-hmm.
Do you map out energy? Sorry. Do you map out, like when you are designing, because now I know we're going to move forward into what you're doing now. But when you are designing some type of learning engagement, learning experience, do you happen to try to map out like the flow of energy when there would be higher peaks of energy, when there's like reflection moments, that type of thing, like a visual? Do you use that by chance?
Not exactly like that, but it's certainly a question. I imagine if however many people are in the room are going to have a different energy map if we were to create that. But certainly I want to think about how long have we been doing this type of activity, and how long have we been sitting still, or how long have you been in, like even a small thing like talk to the person next to you if you're in person, or go into a breakout if you're on Zoom, can shift up the energy and help somebody who's maybe not totally engaged and paying attention in a big group, force them to engage more, but also change up the energy because you get to stand up, or you get to talk in a small group, or like I think all of those pieces are important elements, but I haven't actually drawn like you're talking about.
That's interesting. Okay, one last thing, we can also edit this out. An example from my Julie got one, so I get one. But the hosts are not supposed to for the record. So this is interesting because the very beginning of my career, right? I've also had a very zigzaggy kind of career path. I took a job as a preschool teacher, right? So I didn't do the whole school time. I came in for English because this was in Colombia. So I came in for like the English, and it was like 45 minutes or something like that. 45 minutes with 3-year-olds in a second language is a big challenge. No, but but the point isn't so much like the challenge, is the questions that I had to ask myself, and like what little I knew of. And of course I looked into it, like child's development and psychology, right? But one thing that I think is interesting that we could learn from school teachers, right? People who have been formed and about child development, and kind of know where a certain age groups should be in their developmental process, blah, 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 is that they like the approach to learning experience design is very much focused on like a specific audience. You can't do the same song with 3-year-olds that you can do with 5-year-olds. I mean, right? Like that I learned, or you have to do it in a different way. But it's interesting because now what I see is that often with adults, like sometimes a really good school teacher is good because they know exactly that like every 5 minutes I have to shift up the energy, or even 3 minutes. I think for 3 and 4-year-olds, it's literally like 2 minutes. It's something insane where you're just like, shift it, do something, add something. You lose them, right? Okay. Adults don't need that much as far as every 3 minutes. But what if we took a lot of kind of that approach of like really knowing our audience? I feel that in the organization or like the business world, we tend to kind of like the the client that you just mentioned, no shame on him, but not thinking about like, but wait a minute, these are adults who have been in this time for this, like, still adult humans need a certain amount of time to rest, to decompress, to like walk around. Like, what if we really were in tune with like getting rid of that idea that, you know, they're adults, they can handle it, whatever, 2-3 hours in a workshop, it's fine with no moving around. Like, no, it is absolutely
not fine.
A misunderstanding of like, these are human beings, and yes, they don't have the same exact needs as small children, but we still have very basic biological and right needs that are often not taken into account.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think this question we said we might come back to around like communicating our value as LLC practitioners. I think that's a piece of it, right? Like I think the client response that I told you about is coming from we are not often all together in the same room. And so we want to like take advantage of that experience. I think that's where he was coming from. He's not wrong about that. Fair. I can offer a value I bring as an LLC practitioner is that how we think about our energy and how we manage our reflection time and how we think about the different kinds of rest. And I don't know, let's see if that, let's see where that lands, right? I think we can offer it and somebody has to decide if they want to take the offer.
Right. And we can also talk about the consequences, right? You know what I mean?
Sometimes.
Like,
yeah.
Not in that maybe that's not the right framing, but like, hey,
sure,
if we do a half-hour lunch, sure, they can eat. However, the most likely outcomes are that they will be tired, maybe a little stressed, you know, like this is what you can reasonably expect if you rush through breaks and don't take into account, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right. And then they can decide, because then at least they have all the information. But that sounds like a good bridge. So now, Kelly, you are talking with clients and presenting them different options and, you know, making a case for why they should invest in these types of initiatives, projects, why they should pay you, right? So could you tell us a little bit more about what you're doing now, how you got into it, like what your focus is?
Yeah, sure. 13 years is hard to believe. I have been running Ross Associates, and my work is leadership development. I think about that in probably 4 different pieces of the pie, I might say. So I am a leadership coach, and most of my leadership coaching is one-on-one with senior leaders who are navigating something that is bigger or different. So kind of that idea of what got me here isn't necessarily going to get me to this next level. Could be my role has expanded, the scope has changed, the organization is changing, maybe the whole maybe the whole industry is making a change, but there's something that I need to, as a leader, I need to think about differently. So those are the majority of my coaching clients. Little bit of my coaching work is working with leadership teams, which is a little bit of a cross into facilitation, because there is a coaching element when you're working with a team. But anytime you have more than 2 people in the room, right, you're also needing to be a facilitator, I believe, to hear all the voices in the room and be able to move forward on whatever it is we're trying to accomplish in that conversation. Some of my facilitation work is all the people in the room trying to agree on something like a strategic plan, or maybe be more effective as a group. So maybe there's new people on the team, or something has shifted about the environment. And so there's a reason we're bringing the leadership team together to be more effective. And some of my facilitation is more about like offering like a skill. Like we're going to talk today about like how you deliver good feedback, or, something like that. The third bucket is learning and talent strategy. So that's my consulting work. And every project is different. I would say what those projects have in common is that there is usually a skill we want to build or a behavior we want to change. And so I'm helping the team or the organization to think about making that sticky. What are we going to do so that it doesn't become a flavor of the month, that we are, whatever change we're trying to make or behavior we're trying to build, we are doing that in a way that will stick around. And then fourth and newest to my portfolio is my coaching supervision work, my work helping new coaches to be better coaches primarily. So that's how I think about the work I do.
So, I mean, by the way, just for the record, it sounds like almost all of these, I mean, all of these contain strong learning, a strong learning focus. I mean, no matter, whether you're teaching a skill or you're working one-on-one with a executive, I mean, it's a learning focused, you clearly bring a learning focus to all this.
I would say learning and also change, because everybody I'm working with is also trying to make a change. So they want to learn something. They want to learn it so they can make a change, or they want to change something and they have to learn something in the process. Whatever order they present it, there is learning and there is change management, I think, in all of the work that I do. And in most of the work I do, there's also a knowledge element too.
Got it. Wait, so in terms of change management, you're saying in addition to actually helping them learn, you're also helping them transition, let's say, from point A to point B or whatever?
They are coming. Usually there is a reason that somebody is coming to coaching or asking for there to be a facilitation. They want something to change. They want something to be different.
Yeah. So, maybe a good way to ask the following question is, can you tell us about, you could choose any project from the last 13 years, maybe one that you're particularly passionate about, or that was particularly noteworthy. I'm sure there are many. And maybe just if you could describe to us how you communicated the value of what you were going to bring to the client, and what that kind of onboarding process was like from the moment that you had some sort of conversation with someone to then actually getting onto the project.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about a series of projects I did with a healthcare system. And I think a very initial conversation was with their head of people or HR VP, or I don't remember exactly title, but like in that space. And initially the request was around, we need to get clear. We don't have leadership competencies, so we need to get clear on those, which came out of a conversation that I had with her, like at a networking thing or something, about I think I asked her a question as we were talking about something she was working on, around like something like, how do you decide what makes a good leader at your organization, or something like that. Anyway, it led to this conversation where we were essentially saying, like, if we haven't defined what the things are that good leaders do, then how are you helping the leaders in your organization to do that, to all be consistent, to even be able to give them rate them on how well they do that, give them feedback on how well they do that. So the first project I did with that organization was to build out their leadership competencies. So every leader, we were trying to build leadership competencies across the whole leadership team of this health system. And we did that through a series of focus groups and interviews. And each of the functions still had different things that they needed. Their clinical staff, of course, had differences depending on where they sat in their clinical part. Their finance function had different competencies, but we were working specifically on like leadership that crossed all of those different roles. So that was a whole project around, like, what are the competencies? How do we get the leaders that you have currently to come to some kind of consensus? And then ultimately the most senior leaders decided on what those competencies were, or like essentially agreed with what had come out of all that work. And then I did a whole series of projects where we were putting that into place, I would say. And part of the value, communicating our value as LOC practitioners, I think part of that was true in lots of organizations. There is not everything ties together. So it gets confusing for the people who work there. And so now we have these new leadership competencies. And we said, like, how do we link this? For example, they had a performance management process and tool. So how do we make sure that you're actually evaluating people, managing their performance around these competencies? So even though they had some of that in place, they had to make some changes to have it match up. Because if those aren't linked, then that's really inconsistent for people. And so part of the value we can bring as LLC practitioners is to talk about, like, why would that be a problem if the competency is this, but what you're rating me on are these other things? I did a different project with that same organization to line up. They had a set of values as an organization. We did some work on how for performance management, for leadership competencies and values, we did a lot of stuff around, like, how do we get this out into the org? So crossing both clinical and non-clinical staff, which is already its own barrier, right? Because those are really different skill sets. We were trying to bring some consistency across those. So what does it look like for the charge nurse and the nurses on a hospital healthcare floor? And what does it look like for the people that work in their accounting department? And how do we have differences, but also some consistencies across them? And so there's lots of different learning pieces that went into that. I didn't build all of it. Sometimes it depended on what it was. And as they were building and expanding their team, over time, I moved from more of a, I don't know, extra pair of hands or a doer consultant to more of an advisor as they built out their team over the years. I also coached some leaders along the way. Part of the strategy in that whole, maybe not from the very beginning, but early on, was like, okay, so now the chief people officer was really clear that we needed to make sure that there were some key leaders in place who could help to cascade this. So then I worked with a few of them over time on what was important to them, but also bringing some consistency into how are you yourself living the leadership competencies, and then how are you cascading them down to that next level of leader, for example, on your team. So lots of different overlapping projects. Some of them I did alone, some of them I did with subcontractors, some of them I helped work with in people that were part of that organization. So I would say that's a typical, when you're lucky to have a client that you work with for lots of years, I would say that is a fairly typical way to do it. That, like, how, each project looks a bit different, and we're trying to pull the thread across all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'd love to double click on, like, that first conversation you had with her right at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So you're at a networking event or something, because this is, I think this is like the really, really interesting stuff. Did she know that was she like, oh, hi, Kelly, what do you do? Oh, you do these things. I need some leadership competencies. Is that how the conversation went? Or, like, how did you even the place of, like, leadership competencies might be a good solution for your problem? What was the problem?
So I don't think that was the first. I think about the first conversation is like when you really, like, you're trying to get the conversation, right? The conversation is when is maybe in what you're talking about, like that second time when we actually sat down and, like, talked about what the need was.
Yeah.
I think an important skill that I don't think we talk enough about in whatever the work is that we do is, like, how do you build the relationship enough to be able to set up the coffee meeting or the Zoom meeting or whatever it is, to then talk about that piece. So this was, pre-COVID, and so we were in person and at some kind of other event. I don't remember exactly how it happened, but I think we were talking about what we each did, and I think I built the relationship by having a crisp elevator pitch or whatever you want to call it of like, here's what I do. And then I think I've gotten better at this over the years, but I think being able to then really listen for what might be interesting to the person you're speaking to and starting with that, like of all the things you do, how do you like try to so she wasn't ready for coaching. She was thinking organizationally. So I needed to engage her in a way that would fit with where she was on the need. I think she is a super savvy business leader who was not unaware of the need. I don't know if she had spent what we often talked about in that, like first real sit down conversation and then in future conversations is she often said, I don't have it's really helpful to have somebody to like be a thought partner and talk through this and figure it out because she didn't necessarily have that in the way the organization was structured or the people that were her peers at the time. So I think not everybody is like that. This was a super savvy client who, yes, knew that there was some need. I think she hadn't had time to think about like how she would get there. And for her in particular, she also knew she had to build out the capacity and capability of her team, and she had to grow the team. So she had enough people who could, when we started, I was really an extra pair of hands, like doing a lot of the work because she didn't have people on her team to do it. But that did shift as she grew her team. Not every client is like that, but some of my favorite clients are super savvy people that you are thought partners with.
Well, I think that's actually an important point because it's possible that sometimes, we try to get the client, or sometimes it doesn't pay to educate someone who doesn't really get this from scratch at all. In other words, it's probably worth looking for those, like you said, savvy business leaders who kind of do get it and who kind of are aware of their learning needs or change management needs. So you don't have to actually, explain this from scratch. I'm just thinking of some conversations I've had over the last year or two with people where, where I try to talk about like the things I care about, and even without saying LOC or learning and organizational change, but just talking about this idea of learning in the workplace and change management. And I think maybe one takeaway right now, whereas, when I get this look of like, as though I'm an alien from a foreign planet, like, what does that have to do with my sales quota? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
I think maybe one approach is to be like, okay, like this is just, that's okay. On to the next one. Like, I don't need to teach you.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think as LLC practitioners, we really have to know our audience. And so I think there's a whole bunch of questions underneath what you're saying, Julie, right? Like, sometimes the person I'm talking to is not actually the decision maker or the buyer. And that happens all the time where like you think you've got the right person, or somebody who reaches out and is asking all these questions is actually not the person who's going to make the decision. And sometimes they are the decision maker, but they are not a particularly educated buyer. Not to insult them, but just to say that happens all the time with coaching. Somebody will be like, somebody in my org thinks we need to get so-and-so a coach. And they don't really know anything about what makes good coaching, or sometimes like what coaching even is. So I think as practitioners, we have to be able to try to either read the room or to ask questions to understand like, where is the person at? And what do they need? How much education do they need? But we need to do that in a really respectful way because not a lot of potential clients say, in my experience, not a lot of them say like, I don't know anything about this. Usually they come in with more of I want X. And then as you're talking to them, you're like, I don't know if X is really what they need. So how do I help them understand all the different pieces and parts? And then fewer are like the client I just described to you that was like, is super savvy. And, we had this great conversations about like, what's the right order of different things, or how do we think about layering different pieces on, but already a pretty educated, savvy, like truly a partner, but a bunch of them are not in that camp. So whether you say goodbye at that point, truly to your experience, or you shift how you talk about it, I think that's going to just depend on, where you are and what you're working on and how much work you have and how much you think there's potential here for this potential work.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
So you've been working with this particular client for a few years now, right?
I'm not working with them at the moment, but I did work with them for, oh gosh, like probably off and on for 6 or 7 years, something like that. A long time.
Awesome. Okay, that's awesome. So this is a different type of question, but basically, what do you think maybe like senior leaders, not that particular, not the particular woman that you started everything, but the senior leaders, after 6 or 7 years of different types of projects, of building things out, what do you think they would say that is the value of investing in this type of LOC work?
Well, like many organizations, there had been a lot of shift and change in who those senior leaders were. They had done some org shifts that didn't have anything to do with the project stuff we were doing. They had promoted people had retired or left, or so there wasn't the same group of human beings involved. But I think some of the longer standing people who were there for more of that work, I would say they were probably in two camps, right? I think there were definitely people who were like, oh my gosh, this is super helpful. And sometimes that was tied to something specific, like you made this performance process better, or you improved this tool, or something that was a byproduct, we would say in our world, right? We would say is like, was a domino of the stuff we were working on. It's kind of like the coffee and the breaks, right? Like some of the things people pay attention to are not like the core of it, but it doesn't work without all of it together.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure there were people who wouldn't even know how to answer that question because they were focused on like their functional expertise and wouldn't have even like maybe knew the work was happening because they like had budget visibility or something, but wouldn't necessarily have, I don't know, like wouldn't necessarily have been like, oh, I've seen a huge difference in this or that. I think this is why we have to find the right partners within the organization who are, like believe in the stuff we do and that we can do, see the need in the organization, and also have the decision making and the P&L to be able to make it happen. You're not going to convince, at least I think most of the time, you're not going to convince everybody in the organization, senior leadership, that they should make investment X or Y. Maybe it depends on maybe that's not true in some smaller orgs, but when I think about big systems like this chief people officer, she didn't need to they wouldn't have gotten anything done if everybody at the leadership table had to be involved in every single decision, right? It's just too big of an org. So, but that's probably not true in really small organizations.
Yeah. Do you feel like, what are the advantages of working in your own shop, as kind of a solo practitioner? What are the advantages of doing that as opposed to working for like a big consulting firm?
I think it's pros and cons, and there's trade-offs all over the place. So running your own business, I don't think is for everybody. I think you have to know yourself and know what will, you guys know this, that what will, you have to have a degree of, I don't know, self-motivation or whatever the right word is, right? When you don't have to be at an office or be on a meeting, like you have to have some things that keep you going on your own, I think, to run a business. I think there's so many more things to do than I ever realized before I started running a business. Like I would have told you in my McKinsey life that I was a really good multitasker and had lots of stuff in hand. what I discovered when I started running a business is that that was project, like those were all project work, and I had lots of different project balls in the air.
Right.
You still have to do that as a solo or running a small business. But you also then have to make sure that you like pay your taxes and figure out your accounting software and bill your clients and you know, have whatever materials you need. And you don't have an IT department anymore, so like you also need to make sure your computer works and like all kinds of stuff like that I don't think I had really thought about until I got into running my own business. I think I mean, I think perhaps the advantages depend on you. Like for me, my own advantage is I actually really can say no. I think at least in my McKinsey life, and I think this is true in lots of organizations, like, you don't really say no. You negotiate on the margins a little bit, but you don't really say no. You can totally say no and not do a project when you work for yourself.
Yeah.
I think another advantage is the autonomy, the flexibility. I think that is changing in organizations since I was part of an organization. But certainly the make your schedule and figure out where you're going to be and how you get your work done and what that all looks like. When I started my business was really different as a business owner than it was as a member of an organization where someone else made a lot of those decisions for me. So I think those are some of the trade-offs. What would you add? You're both business owners.
Go ahead, Tilly.
No, I mean, I think the biggest advantage is a sense of independence. I also think that great organizations give their employees a lot of autonomy too. So it doesn't have to be, but also I mean, honestly, the potential for financial independence, even though it's much more difficult, but it is, if you own your own business and build it up, it's easier to make more money. And we haven't really talked about money a lot, but it's in this conversation, but it's an important one to have. Maybe part 2, we could talk a little bit more about money.
Yeah.
But that is important. I mean, but look, ultimately what we are asking is how do you convince someone, an executive or whatever it is, to pay you for the value that you are going to provide for them. And obviously, when you're part of an organization, that paycheck, even though it might be greater, is shared by the organization. Whereas if it's you, then sure, you share a little bit with Uncle Sam or a lot of it with Uncle Sam, and then and maybe sometimes you hire some people for a project or whatever it is. But the potential to keep a lot more of that pie is there. Yeah, I don't know. Anything to add, Alma?
I would say that for the client, thinking about it, like, what are the pros for a client to work with a smaller consulting, boutique consulting, is that they can get, I mean, because since that was my model for so many years, I think one of the things they most appreciated was like, you might not be using kind of McKinsey or the Big Four consulting's pricing models of like hourly rates, or maybe just a few things would be in hourly rates. So you don't have to, so you can give them much more tailored, first of all, tailored experiences, tailored customs, customs. That is the wrong language. Solutions. There we go. Tailored solutions. You can, like, for a client, you can really become a trusted advisor and not have to watch, like all of your billing hours. Of course, behind the scenes as an independent consultant or whatever, you are trying to track those things so you can be profitable, right? So that you're not just like giving everything to the client. You have some boundaries, but it's really different than working like with a team. And then also like, there's just so much more flexibility for a client to get kind of access to you as a thought partner, as an advisor, as someone who can listen, give some different strategies, and not have to like, I was on the phone with you for 20 minutes, so I'll be billing you this. You know what I mean? Because you're actually like
That I think depends a
Doing
lot on
that.
the organization. Many big organizations price a project and aren't sending you a bill for 20 minutes.
Oh, you're talking
So
about consulting.
absolutely. Yeah. And absolutely, I was building trusted relationships and learned how to do that in my McKinsey life. So I don't think we can say that we only build trusted relationships when we're
No,
small,
but it's much
but
more
we do it in a
tailored.
different way.
Exactly.
Could
It's
be.
much more tailored and you're much more in control
Hmm.
of it than
Right.
with a bigger,
I was
with a bigger
actually,
team.
yeah, Alma, I was chuckling a little bit inside because I could hear a McKinsey partner giving the exact same pitch that you just gave about why
Uh-oh.
someone should hire, them.
Yeah.
Um, but fair enough. I do think that there are, you have the ability to just be more nimble, and for a certain kind of
Yes.
client, that's very advantageous.
Yeah.
Probably for a big corporate client who's used to some, more structure,
Yeah.
it might, who knows, right?
Hmm.
But
And not
okay,
every project is the same. So I think it's
right.
really hard to, in broad strokes, say, like, this is why I would pick big or this is why I would pick small. Like, what are you trying to do? And what do you need, like, out of, like, what off the shelf is helpful? What custom built is
Yeah.
helpful? Both can do off the shelf and custom built. So I think it just depends on so much of the situation. Yeah, I don't know. That might be a question you should ask somebody who's a buyer of services who thinks about like big or small and how they go there. I have sat on both sides of those in the serving room, but I haven't been the buyer. And so I'm maybe not the best person to answer that. I can just tell you what it's like in each of those experiences. You also have to remember that
Yeah.
I have, like, this is my career experience. So when I was at McKinsey, I had less experience, right? It was different than if I was at McKinsey today, right? So 15 years have or 13 years have passed, and I don't have the same set of qualifications that I had then. So that is also, I think, a difference
Right.
in the story I tell you, right? Like, I bring just my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
Yeah,
one. Oh,
go ahead.
I might reroute us. So if you want to stay on this, we can also just edit this part. But my one area of curiosity that it's not on our outline and we haven't talked about it as much, but now that I hear a little bit more is that, I mean, the thread kind of in your professional career of learning, the whole experience around learning, growth, change, working through change, etc. At some point there is a shift towards getting better at the specific skill or solution of coaching, right? And not just because I think at McKinsey you weren't so much doing formally coaching, you were doing all the other types of roles, right, for organizational change and learning. So when did coaching come in, and why? Where did your interest in coaching as an approach come into play?
Um, when I look back, I was using coaching skills almost my whole professional life without
Right.
really knowing that's what they were. Um, so I think I learned a lot about coaching in running focus groups and interviewing people, and even in the um on a project trying to get somebody who's like a difficult client who doesn't want to give you this data or doesn't want to have this meeting with you or whatever, like, even in trying to build a relationship and understand what resistance, what's happening, what is the resistance, or I think it's resistance, is it resistance? I think that even those are things that helped me with today what I would say are coaching skills, but at the time I would just have said were like my doing my job skills. Um, a big difference, as you all know, between coaching and consulting is my job in consulting was often to know the answer or advise on a process to find an answer. So it was a lot more tell. My job as coach is a lot more ask. It's not my job to know the answer. It is my job to help the person find their own answer, or just even to like wander around in that murky area and in the direction of, maybe answer is too specific. And so the skills overlap, but there is some difference. I ask, for example, as I started studying coaching, I realized that the kind of question I need to ask is different. in consulting, probably dangerous to try to generalize, but if I take that risk, I think in my consulting questions are questions that give me more information so that I can help give an answer or a process or a next step to a client.
Yeah.
My questions as coach are more about helping the person look at something from a different perspective or think about something differently or explore it in some way that they haven't yet looked at it. And so the questions are different or have different flavors to the question. So your question of like, I don't think there is like a moment in time when I can say like, okay, I'm shifting from consulting to coaching. I think in some ways I was kind of always bringing some piece of coaching.
Yeah.
As I learned more about coaching, I was able to more clearly like draw a distinction between what you do as a consultant and what you do as a coach. And for sure there is still overlap, but there are some differences between them. And even today, I still do both of those. And I think I'm better at both because I do the other.
Yeah. What are some moments where the coaching hat, let's say, is particularly like a benefit for your organizational clients versus the consulting?
Mm-hmm. I did a big project I guess sort of started the year before, but into last year, with a construction company who, with a particular business unit, geography, area of a construction company. And my client was the head of that business unit. And it was presented and scoped as a like consulting, we would say in this language, right? To help that leadership team be more effective and in the midst of a lot of growth. And they needed to make some organizational changes that weren't the changes themselves were not the scope of the project, but they were sort of important context around like they're growing. So they're going to have to figure out how they structure themselves a bit differently from how they are today. And I think if I had gone into that as like consultant Kelly, I would have like had a hypothesis and asked questions around like, I don't know, like you have this operations manager, like what do you think, what do you know about how many projects an operations manager can manage? And like those kinds of questions that are questions, they're not totally leading, but there is this view that you can, you would be able to hear that was saying like, how many operations managers do you need to have if you're going to get to like this scale or that scale, right? Coach Kelly, or I don't know, I wasn't really a coach then, but like my job wasn't to be a coach in that project, but my like coach hat is maybe the way to say it. I think helped me to your question of like, where does that serve me? I started with like to my client, the head of the piece, and then to several of his senior people. I was like, tell me what's working. Tell me what's not working. Tell me what do you, so we like, you hired me because you need to make some changes. Tell me more about that. Help me understand that. And so I think the coaching questions or whatever you want to call them, like served to get a bigger landscape. And yeah, eventually we did have to talk about like, as you scale, you can't the same role can't handle the scale, all the same scale. So eventually we had to talk about that. But I think it was way farther along in the process. And in the meantime, I learned so much more about their business and about what they were trying to solve for that my hypothesis would have been only partially right, which I think is true of most hypotheses. But and maybe some people would say like we took a more wandering route than the like, let's go in and here's what you think you know how to do. I think I've been exposed to both approaches in the different experiences I've had. Over the years. Does that give you what you're looking for?
I think so. Julie, you have any?
Yeah, look, I think this is a fascinating conversation, and I think we're gonna save the rest of that, the coaching versus consulting for a part two. That and Because just because we're almost up on time, but that I think I really like that insight, especially of just what the purpose of the question is in coaching versus consulting.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really powerful. And you know, even like I'm sure even as a consultant, sometimes you'll ask coaching questions and sometimes you'll ask consulting, right? And vice versa. So this is a really, really fascinating topic.
And they're both beautiful questions, by the way.
Absolutely.
It's a different type
they are different. Yeah.
Yeah, they serve a different purpose. So I think just to wrap up here, you know, as a learning practitioner, as someone who's, first of all, I just want to say one other thing, like a big takeaway for me, and I'm thinking like just putting myself, you know, back into you know, whatever it is, 21-year-old Kelly, graduating from University of Indiana, and like maybe you knew this, but like I certainly in college, I didn't know that it's possible to have a career as a learning facilitator, as an LOC, as a learning and organizational change practitioner. That's something that not maybe things are changing, but hard to know that. But I do think that like to me, this is a big takeaway to actually communicate the importance of learning in organizations and the importance and the fact that that doesn't just happen. Well, some of it does just happen actually, but that when you highlight it and when you facilitate it and when you design it in a way that's conducive to better learning, it adds tremendous value, and that people could consider this as a really great career path, you know. And you know, so I think that's really great. And the more that I, as also someone who's a learning professional on some level, the more that I can you know, get better at articulating the need and the value for this, you know, the better off I am at my own business, right? Personally. So I think I think with that we're gonna wrap up with just our final question. So which is as the learning practitioner, and as you with all of your interests, Kelly, what have you been curious about lately? What have you been learning? What have you been thinking about?
So many things. I'm thinking a lot about generative AI and how do I bring that into the work I do and embrace the ways that helps me or could potentially help me. But also I'm not trying to I don't think we're trying to replace coaching or facilitation with AI. So how do I like understand the pieces of it and then also what it isn't going to do. I have a lot of clients that are experiencing or have over the last years experienced burnout. I've been reading more and researching more about that. Nick Petrie is doing some super interesting work around burnout. And so I think that's a really interesting question. And I'll keep myself to three. I spent a lot of years at McKinsey and we do things in threes. Just yesterday, I was on a really interesting learning session about how to manage triggers for ourselves as a facilitator. And I learned about a new model that I don't know about, Dr. Kathy Obear's triggering event cycle. And this whole idea of what happens to me when maybe a participant in a experience gets triggered, when that person triggers me. And then what are the things that happen as I run around the cycle and offer it for how to like get out of that. So those are three things that I am thinking about at the moment. Very
cool. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Wish I could ask some more beautiful questions, but
I know.
Thank you for leaving us all curious. I think I'm like, I'm going to look up those three things.
More things to learn about, right?
Yeah, no, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're grateful for your time, for your insight, for sharing of yourself, of your story, of your experience. It's helpful to us and to our millions and millions of listeners.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I will stop recording.
I'm ranting here. Forgive me. I'm the host. I'm not supposed to do that.
Okay, one last thing. We can also edit this out. An example from my life. Julie got one, so I get one.